It's 11:05. Let's get rolling with this today. Hey everybody, welcome to the live stream. I'm Aaron King with Photog Adventures. This is an astrophotog playlist video where we're focusing on learning everything we can about Milky Way photography. So let's just pull up the big window. Let's get rolling. I've got a bunch of people online. Jordan Yance has joined us. Hey guys. And so if you guys have any questions at all, hit me up here. Robert will help me answer it, and it'll also help me see what the question is. And welcome Picture Monk Jordan Yance. If you haven't checked out Jordan's stuff, go to his website, picturemonk.com. All right. So let's talk about settings. Settings. Well, everyone gets out there with the Milky Way, and they get a little bit intimidated with the idea of, what am I supposed to do? What's my shutter? What's my ISO? What's my setting? What should I do with my focus? What should I do with everything? Or maybe my Kelvin? Maybe what should I have this on, that off? Well, we're going to make it as simple for you as possible today. It's going to be a discussion of items that basic beginner settings, and from there you adjust with your scene, your setting, how much your foreground's being lit. Everything that you need to know from this is how to properly expose a Milky Way. And so I'm just going to show you guys my example, and I'm going to show you some bad examples. I'm going to show you everything I can to teach that, and I'm going to rely a lot more this time on questions. So guys who are in here in the live chat, make sure you hit me up with stuff. Hit me up with anything, because I want to make sure that this makes sense to you. So let's go ahead and minimize the window. We're out here in Lightroom, and I'll leave this up while I start my discussion on focus. So you guys who have a Canon camera, you'll recognize my instructions very quickly. Those of you with Nikon, Sony, Pentax, Olympus, you're going to have a different way of getting your live screen on the back, have a live view, and then a magnification. So let me show you what I do. I'm going to pretend like this is my camera, just so that I have something to hold. When you get your camera out and you're going to work on getting focus, you're going to get out in a dark sky location. Your eyes are starting to adjust. You don't have to wait for your eyes to adjust. This is just at the very beginning of the stage when you're getting set up. You know your tripod's where you want to be. You've got your camera lens on that you want to use. You have it all the way. If you have a zoom lens like this Tamron, make sure you're not at 30 unless you're planning on shooting at 30. If you're planning on shooting at 15, go to 15. Get to that point where you're going to be shooting. So you know you're at full wide open aperture, 2.8. You're going to be at 15 millimeter. That's what you've decided. Then setting it up to that point, make your adjustments on focus. Why? Because it'll change just a little bit depending on your zoom, depending on your aperture. And so you're going to want to make sure that you have everything set. I'm looking to get Star Tracker Adventure. Is it an auto guider, another accessory, or the Adventure have it built it? Okay, Joe can get an awesome answer from Kirk, because he has that exact thing. So I'll leave that up to you, Kirk, to answer in the chat. Sorry, those of you who are watching this later, the answer will come through chat. So on the back of my camera, I got it set up. I got f2.8 on my Tamron lens. I've got it all the way out to 15 millimeter. And on the back, on my Canon, I can quickly switch from live view, from viewfinder. Right at the top, I hit that button. It switches to the LCD screen on the back. From the back, now I'm looking at the stars. Now I look up in the sky. My eyes not adjusted is actually better, because which star stands out? If you have any planets that are available, go right to a planet. Make sure that planet is showing up at the middle of your lens. You know, look at this bulbous lens. I have a very, here, let me go big actually right now. I have a very bulbous lens on this Tamron, and so if I were to put the star in this location, it's going to have a lot more distortion if I put it here. I want as little distortion as possible when I'm trying to get my focus. So I get that star centered, or that planet centered right on that spot. And then if I'm having a hard time seeing it in my live view, make sure that you turn up your ISO as high as you can go, and maybe even go to shutter 30 seconds, just so that you have as much light coming through as possible so you can see. Another thing, if you're at 30 seconds and a 12,000 ISO and you still can't make out any of the white dots of the stars or planets, you might be so out of focus that everything, oh, of course it crashed. This is fantastic. I love this thing. Why does it always crash? So we're going to turn on live view again and get that window up for you guys so that you can see me. Really disappointed that it keeps popping off. So let's go ahead, turn this on, and get the OBS viewer to view it. And let's double check. All right, I'm changing that for you guys. Sorry for this little delay. Making sure you can see me when I'm giving you this example. And they just have to die. I'm trying to use the old settings and they're just not recognizing it. So let me just add a new connection. If you guys have any questions, hit me up right now while I'm doing this, since I have to fight with the OBS viewer. There's always got to be something. Even when I have it totally figured out, something's always got to go wonky. So let's go ahead, turn on that, and let's shrink this. Well, not shrink, let's shrink the side. So you don't have to look at all my settings. It seems like every live webinar, I have to do this at least once. I blame the EOS app. For whatever reason, it crashes. Not loving that. But let's go big so you can see me, and let's talk about focus again. Oops, grabbed the wrong corner. All right, let me just see if any question came through while that was going on. And there we go. I had to close the app and reopen the feed. Okay, looked like AZ Tech didn't have it working for a second. I'm glad you're there. All right, back to the live feed, back to the annoying nuisance that this window is. Talking about focus. Well, focus right here is something that you can mess up entirely and then not see any of the settings. And so I'm sorry, not settings, but see any of the stars. I'm distracted by the fact that I have to get all of this back up and running. So if this focus ring is completely out of focus, you've seen it before where you have a nice little pin of light and then you stretch it, out of focus, and then it kind of fades away to oblivion. And you're already having a hard time seeing those stars in the screen. You're not as zoomed in as you want to be. You're as bright as you can set up your camera to be, 30 seconds, 12,000 ISO. But you're still not seeing it. It's possible that your focus ring is at that point where it's just so out of focus, it's blurred them to oblivion. So if you're really not seeing that planet, you're like, I know that's Jupiter. It's crazy bright. I'm pointed right at it, but I still can't see it in the viewfinder, in the live view. I'm just not getting anything. Turn that focus ring extremely right and left and see if it all of a sudden pops up. I sat there for 10 minutes one time helping a friend out in Arizona, and she had her camera set up. We had her ISO right. We had her shutter right, and we just couldn't pick up a single star. Not in the planet, none of the planets, none of the stars. We just couldn't see anything. We wanted to focus on one of those points, and we were out in the desert. We didn't have any other light sources to focus on. And so we're thinking, what the heck is going on? I finally touched her camera lens, and I started changing the focus, and whoop, here it came right in. So just in case you get stuck in focus like that, check the focus ring. So you have the live view up, you get the planet visible, this bright star visible in the center of your lens. Now what you're going to do is you should have a magnifying glass somewhere in your settings or on the back. My Canon 6D has it right on the back. I hit that once, twice, and it goes to 10 times zoom. When you start zooming in, you'll see that you're not perfectly centered in, and you can go ahead and move your camera a little bit and put that right in the middle of it as best you can. And then that's when you pull out your magnifying glass of choice. I like the Carson LumiLoupe because of this feature right here. I think you can tell what I mean by when the focusing distance where you use it, you got your eye right up in there. Let me go like this. You got your eye right up in there, and if you didn't have this part of the plastic that's holding it in, or holding it the right distance from the subject you're looking at, you would have to do this. And as you're standing there in the dark and the cold, you're not standing perfectly still. And so you're going to have a focus go in and out just on your magnifying glass. So it's great to have the Carson LumiLoupe with its perfectly distant plastic focus holder. I don't know what to call it. It just helps it stay in focus. And I'm looking right in there on the pixels. I got the pixels of the star perfectly visible, and my other hand is on the focus ring of my camera. And I'm working it back and forth and making sure that I toggle that to the perfect focus. As you focus, you're going to see it go from big blur to an obvious small thing, but then it just keeps going. It goes a little tighter. Or it doesn't go tighter. It goes from same tightness, but it goes a little purple, a little white, a little other color, depending on your camera. You see a little bit of color aberration happen. I personally have not verified it enough with enough images compared to keeping it on the purple versus going to the white, whether or not this is true. My personal preference is that I go to where it's purple and then I go tighter till that purple goes away. Either side of the purple, that's the problem. You zoom into the purple and maybe going past it is going to go out of focus versus in. So I'm looking literally at the number of pixels that I can see lit up by the white dot of the star. And that white dot of the star is going to be 4 to 6 pixels on the back of my Canon 6D. And I'm matching it up, and it is how tired you are, how great your eyesight's working, how great everything around you is not distracting you. There's not one of your buddies with his headlamp and it keeps blip, blink, blip, flash, 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 blitzes your eyes with his camera, with his headlight. And so you guys, you're going to find it as, am I 100% confident that I got in focus? This is the best way to get there and feel most confident. But it's okay. When you get there and you've tightened it and you've checked it, you've gone big, you've gone small, big, and small, big, small, 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 purple, purple, white, and just hold it. Okay, I'm done. Just call it, because you're going to love the picture. The pixel peepers like Rob Bryan and I are probably going to go, that's a little out of focus. But don't worry about us. We're just jerks. We're just anal. We're crazy about that. So just get that picture out and take the shot. But that's the best way to start getting your focus there. The other thing you should do, you notice can you see it well? Yeah, a little bit of gaffer's tape right here on my camera. I keep that gaffer's tape on there because I always tighten the focus ring with it. Yeah, it's the Carson Lumi Loop 10 times. And, Susan asked that too. Yep, I used the Carson Lumi Loop 10 times. I bought it on Amazon, and it was a whopping $5. So, easy thing to buy. Not something to worry about ever. So this tape, I peel it off, and at this point I've got to be careful I don't have a problem moving my focus ring. So I just tape it off, and you don't go like this because then you might turn the ring. You just depress it and make sure you're not turning it. On the Tamron, the focus ring is nice and sturdy. It's harder to move. On the Rokinon, it's a pain in the butt. This is an awesome lens for astrophotography, but this focus ring, it turns with no effort at all. And so you're up there going to tape it off, and I don't know if you can see, but the focus ring is this big. It's all the way back here, and so you don't have just a little ring to worry about. You got to tape off the whole thing practically. That's why I have a bigger piece of tape. So I taped that off, and then watch. Even with it taped off, it has a little bit of give right and left. So once I get my focus on the Rokinon, I'm just going and not touching it anymore. I tape it off, call it, boom. And you will need to check it overnight. If it gets really cold after about an hour or two of being out there and you're still going, refocus. Because your infinity point, can I get you to see this? Probably not. Maybe you can recognize that. It has a range. It has infinity is from here all the way to here. So I take off my tape and I go to that point of infinity, and this point's infinity, and this point's infinity, and this point's infinity. So what do? You could go in the day and find your point of infinity where it's in perfect focus and mark it off. And then every time you go out at night, you go right there. But if you have an extreme weather change, an extreme change of cold to hot or hot to cold, this lens infinity point will change. It'll be more in focus, turned more to the right instead of where it was where you saw during a warm day. So as the lens conditions change, it's particularly getting colder, the infinity point will adjust. That's why they have a range. They don't just have one point. Some lenses do have a true infinity point, and they even have a click. It's like, click, I'm in infinity. Those are awesome. It's just they need to also have good coma, and so we get stuck with something like the awesome performing Rokinon with a terrible focus. Not terrible, but it's just a ton more effort. The Tamron, brilliant focus, but the heaviest thing you can hike with. That's how I do focus. Any questions? Water flow, water, use the sharp. Oh, yeah, I was going to recommend that too. If you have a Botnov mask or you want to use the Sharp Star 2 from Ian Norman at Lonely Spec, it's awesome. How do I best show you this? I'll use these two things. So you have this X that's happening. And as you focus, you're going to see, well, I'll use this. Pretend like this is my, that's a terrible way of doing that. I'll use this lens cleaner. So these two wipes for lens cleaning. You've got an X happening already. And then you have this like middle line that moves across that X. That's terrible. So that X line is right here and here, but then you have a middle point. And as you turn and focus, because of the way the light refracts off of it, in that Botnov mask shape, the angle that it turns the light, it gives you that white point, and it goes right and left. And once it's in the center of the intersecting X, you know you're in focus. So much easier than this other method, but it's also so much easier than going and guessing. It's easier than hoping. So getting a Sharp Star 2 or a Botnov mask that you can put on the front of your camera is the best way to go. You saw my bulbous element on this Tamron. I can't screw on filters, and so I have to use those expensive Nissi or Lee filters and Haiba or something. I have to buy those, fit them to it, and affix a large, like 150 millimeter Sharp Star, which Ian doesn't sell for cheap. So, Ian, I love it and I want it, but I don't have one yet. I get my focus with $5 for now, and it's working out pretty well, but I can't wait to get it. So, any questions about focus before I go on? Yeah, expensive method indeed, but awesome, and flawless, but expensive. I mean, not just the filter, I have to buy the holder and everything. And, once you start buying a filter holder, you start buying ND filters and awesome polarizing filters. I know that it would cost me a lot because of where I would go next with it. Okay, so let's talk about actual settings. And unfortunately, you have to watch me zoom because this thing is ridiculous. Oh, of course, I grabbed the wrong one. So, going to the Let's Fight Forever control of my camera. Let's move this down, get me small. Oh, this whole time I've left my focus on there. I'm sorry, guys. You had to see that stupid square on my face the whole time. You set everything up, and then it turns off, and it kills it. So here we go. Here's an old picture of mine. I'm going to start with something underexposed. And how do you know whether you've underexposed something? Is it precisely the number? Always go 20 seconds, always go 6400 ISO. That's not something I can tell you. One, you're going to be in an area with different light. You're going to have a foreground like this one that you're seeing where it just zooms around to all sorts of pictures. You're going to see a foreground like this where it's all black, no light whatsoever. But you're also going to be in locations like this one where you have some light happening in your foreground because of by virtue of being near a city, the light pollution of the area. And so you're going to have different settings, need different stuff depending on how much light's coming in. Well, why is the light important? Because we're going to use our histogram to know if you've properly exposed the Milky Way. So let me show you a bad histogram first. Actually, you know what? Let me show you this graphic. This graphic came from Royce Bair's book. I always reference it when I teach people this. Royce Bair's fantastic. Get Milky Way Nightscapes. I'll put a link in this video afterwards so you can get his book, because love that guy, love this graphic. Okay, quickly, you can see what I'm talking about, what a proper exposure looks like on your histogram. Let me make sure I have the chat window up so I can see any questions. Robert says my face tracking bracket was driving him crazy. I wish I could have you turn that off from there, Rob. That would have been awesome. So here's a proper exposed histogram for the Milky Way. I think you can even make out the words right here. Foreground, night sky, Milky Way. So on your histogram, if you're new to cameras, you have a luminance histogram talking about the light levels, and you've also got RGB color histograms that tell you if your reds are peaking, blues and greens are peaking. Well, in this situation, we're doing a luminance histogram, and most likely you're already default at luminance. If you see it as white and black, you know you have a luminance histogram. So on the back of your camera, let's use this again as the back of the camera. And I've got this histogram popping up after I've taken the image. On the Canon 6D at least, I will take the picture first so I can see a full exposure. And then I'll look at that image and turn the histogram info on, and I'll check it. And if I have this is the brilliant histogram you want. This is the histogram of glory. This is going to get you there. So what is happening on the histogram? Your foreground. Why is it this crazy peak? Well, the histogram is whites to midtones to blacks. And the black over here on the far left, it's peaking to the top. I'm knocking my lights because I'm waving my arms too much. This right here is a peak saying, hey, there's tons of black in your image. Well, is that okay? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look at my image. Let's see what the histogram is on this image. Oh, it's not going to show the histogram because the photo is missing. Fantastic. Curse you, King, for not going out here. So here is another histogram of some light painting. And let's go to the histogram that I took of the Milky Way. This is a good example of something that changed. So let's go back. Let's take it all the way to its raw and see it there. So the raw histogram, let's make this histogram huge. This is a good example of a histogram that's underexposed. Don't fight with me. Give me a larger histogram. Come on. No, you're not going to give it bigger than that. Awesome. Well done, Lightroom. Well done. So this histogram, I hope you guys can make much of that. I'm sure you can see it fine enough. But you can see how I have my foreground peak, and then I have a peak of light. This is quasi-exposed. If you look back at our image, you have a bump, a foreground going up from all the black. Okay, the first bump on the left, it's in the blacks. That's all the way up. I mean, look at this. This is 1/3 of the image is entirely black. So that makes sense. That matches up. Then what's happening here? What is going on with this bump, and why do I want it? You're going to see the night sky. And from all the way to the blacks to the midtones, the night sky is going to show up on the histogram. Why? It's not pure black. A lot of it's black, but you have, like you're seeing in this image, you have stars everywhere. You have nebula. You have dark lanes in the Milky Way. You can see this picture is not even all that in focus. And then here you can see the blacks of the foreground. So the sky, what does it have? Light pollution down here. It has the Milky Way, it has black of the black space, it has stars everywhere. So my histogram is reporting that, reporting every star point, reporting the Milky Way lightness, reporting the light pollution, reporting all the black that it sees down here. And it peaks because there's a lot of elements bringing it up right here. And there's a question that he's answering. Space TV, how long is remaining of this live stream? Hey, Space TV. Yep. He's right, half an hour. I go for an hour, and I'll bleed into that next hour a little bit, depending on how many questions I have. So, back to the histogram. The histogram right here of the night sky is going to stretch all the way from the black to the midtones, but then you want to peak for your Milky Way. And the reason why this is strong is because you have the blacks of your foreground, and then the Milky Way is separate. You want to have that separation. You have two humps with some separation. You're on the right track. You probably got a good exposure coming up. Well, in my example here, I have a hump, I have a separation, then I have a hump. So why do I say it's kind of underexposed? Well, because I didn't go close to the mid. If you see the midpoint, you want your second hump to reach to the midpoint. Am I asking for the peak up here to be at the midpoint? No. You don't need to do that. I was just talking with Rob last week or a week ago before that, asking about, hey, where do you put your on the histogram? He says that he usually ends up, if it goes too much to the midpoint, he gets too much noise. It's not good at all. It's better for him to go back from it. But then he was looking at his histogram and he was noticing, yeah, I'm not putting the hump on the midpoint. I'm just kind of reaching the midpoint. And it's a lot similar to this than he realized when we were talking about it. And so we both realized in his Nikon and in my Canon, this is true. I can verify from his experience and my experience that I am properly exposed at this. I don't want to cross the midpoint too much unless I'm going to go to the exposed to the right method, where you have an ETTR method, go as far right as you possibly can, get all that data, and then all sorts of processing you can bring out a Milky Way in a light polluted area. It's nuts. Ian Norman has a good video for that. Check it out. ETTR method. So I had a question. Joe Lorenzetti says, anyone use the Rokinon 8mm fisheye with detachable lens? I want the circular frame. Wondering if it's the best alternative to Canon's 8 to 15mm. I can verify that Rokinon's fantastic. I have this Rokinon 24mm, but I have it for the 1.4 aperture. The 8mm, is that a 2.8? I think it is. I don't have the 8mm, haven't used it. 14mm is a 2.8. It doesn't have that 1.4 benefit of a larger aperture. But if you want that fisheye look, go for it. Sounds awesome. I had a situation 2 years ago when I wanted to capture all the planets. There were 5 planets visible. Mercury was above the horizon enough before sunrise that you could see Mercury, Venus, Mars, Saturn, Jupiter. It was fantastic. And I could get all 5, but I had to do a panorama to get it in. I wish I would have had an 8mm, because then I could just put all of that in one shot and it would have been a really cool picture. It turned out to be an okay image, but nothing special. It's 3.5. That's right. Rob says it's 3.5. I just recently looked it up. I was talking to someone else about it, and it's not even a 2.8. It's a 3.5. Yes, it has a large viewing area, but it's a 3.5, which means you should stack or panorama to try and make up the loss of that 3.5 aperture blocking off more light. You want to have as open as you possibly can. 2.8 or better is perfect, and a 3.5 is workable. It's very workable. It's just it's at that threshold of being on the fence of workable and crappy. So I'd say the 8mm is great, but you're going to have that issue. Hey, Space TV, you're saying you get a notification 30 minutes late? Well, thanks a lot, YouTube. So you're saying that you get notified, hey, Photog Adventures is live and it's 30 minutes in? I'm sorry about that. That's the worst. You're going to have to check out our Facebook page and keep checking here, because it says that I'm going to go live. In fact, right after this, by tonight sometime, I'll put up next week's broadcast. That's going to be the final one where we talk about gear, specifically what gear I have and some other gear I recommend, and just answer any question there. And so we'll have gear next time. It's going to be at 11 a.m. Mountain Time, so join us if you can. Sorry you missed the first half. So back to this midpoint Milky Way. You got the jump, you got the second hump. It's reaching towards the middle, but it's not overlapping. So my histogram, what's wrong with it? Well, it's not terribly wrong. I mean, look at this one example of processing for it. You can see I pulled some stuff out. Well, you look at this histogram, and let's compare it to another one. Let's go to my dry pond Milky Way right here. What's the histogram on this guy? And let's even make it raw. Go back to the import, my raw image. There's my histogram. Man, that looks almost identical. And this was my epiphany moment. I'd heard it from Royce. I'd seen it from Royce. I read it in his book. But I was just so nervous about noise. I just didn't want noise. And so I just looked on the back of the LCD screen. I set my settings and went to this setting that I felt like low noise, 3200. In fact, what was it on that last one? Going back to this image, what was my actual settings? And it was, oh, not telling me anymore. It is 15 seconds, 2.8. at ISO 2000. Okay, remember that ISO. Let's go back to this other one. And the ISO on this one that has a much better looking histogram, ISO 5000. And this was the first place that I went past 3200. Maybe 40 something. I think I went in the 40s before, but never 5000, 6000. I was nervous. I was nervous how bad it would turn out. I was in this last Milky Way of the season. It's pretty much vertical as soon as the sun sets and astronomical twilight's over. And so I didn't want to mess up this shot, but I wanted to try it out. I wanted to test out what Royce was telling us. And I was like, you know what? Let's see what we can get for a histogram. And it took until I got to 5,000 for it to work. I'm thinking that my other images are not going to be in this quick collection. So let me see if I can find it in all photographs. Please work, Lightroom. All right. Let's go back to some of my early images. Oh, here's my kids. Oh, Yosemite. Wow. It's just... Lightroom is such a pain sometimes. It's slow, and then it just jumps around. Let's go back to quick collection. Click on this, go back to all photographs, and so you can see what I'm talking about. All right, now I'm just gonna use the arrow key. Let's not risk it anymore. Let's go back until I see one of these exposures at a different setting. Edited in Photoshop. I forgot I did that. Let's go down, 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 down. I was messing around with my settings right at the very beginning of the astronomical twilight period, and I was looking at my histogram. Perfect. Slow down, Lightroom. Here we go. First off, astronomical twilight. This picture is during nautical twilight. Look at how bright it is. Then we go into astronomical twilight towards the end, and you can see how it still washes out your Milky Way. Full darkness occurs. Look at that difference. It completely changes how much you can see the Milky Way. So if you ever wondered why I say wait for astronomical twilight to end, that's why. So let's look at the setting. Here's my exposure at 3200. The image is missing, unfortunately, so it's not going to show me the histogram. But at 3200, that's how well it showed up. 4000, 5000. If only it would show the histogram. I really am kicking myself, guys. I'm sorry that I believed these images were here on this hard drive before I came in. But the histogram at 5000, you can see, apparently not unless I go to the quick collection, you can see that it has a good hump, a good separation from the foreground. And how well did the image turn out? Well, I got done with all the raw editing, get done with balancing everything, and you can see just how much detail is coming out in my image. Let's go to the final edit. We could see the color of this red air glow. Later in the year, red air glow is looking awesome right here. I even should have brought it out more, but I did a color filter in Color Effects Pro and changed it from this look to this look, because I love this more, even though this is not a true representation of what the Milky Way looks like. It's not that blue, it's not that teal, it's not that yellowish red at the bottom, so we don't have that. But you can see the situation of the stars and how cool they're looking and how much detail is out here. Even in my areas of coma in the corner, you can just see a ton of detail in the sky, and I was amazed. A properly exposed Milky Way looks like that compared to this, an underexposed Milky Way. Gone were the days that I cared about noise. Like, forget it. I'll fix the noise if it's that noisy. Honestly, this is so weak compared to my other image that had a properly exposed Milky Way. It's amazing what a difference of 2000 ISO to 5000 ISO. This one's at 20 seconds at Whoa, it's not F5. That's telling me my foreground. My foreground was set for F5. At 20 seconds, F2.8, ISO 5000. That's my star. Now, I haven't caught on to any questions, Rob. Has anything come through? All right, they're just still talking to themselves. No questions. Rob, write me a question, copy and paste a question if I missed anything. So now at 5000 ISO, at 20 seconds, well, I look at my stars, and this is when the pixel peeping begins. And I look at my trailing. It's just slight. I have a full frame camera. I'm using the 15 millimeter Tamron, the 600 rule, the 500 rule, even the more conservative 400 rule, where it says 400 divided by the focal length you have. So 400 divided by 15. That's something like 22 seconds or something, 21. Let me ask Siri. What is 400 divided by 15? So I have 15 millimeter focal length, 400 rule. Oh, 26.6 seconds. If I went by the 600 rule, What is six? Oh, find a barber 600 rule. Okay, you got to turn Siri off when you're just talking. What is 600 divided by 15? So if I use the 600 rule, it says I can go for 40 seconds. No, 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 no. I mean, this is 20 seconds, and look at the trailing that's happening. Is that ruining the image? No. No, it's not ruining the image, but yeah, there's some trailing. So how do I solve trailing? So then we go on to our next setting. Well, let's summarize real quick before I get too excited. Your histogram. How do you get there? Well, I chose 15 millimeter because my composition I planned during the daylight. I saw I want this in view, I want that up there. I'll work between these trees. That's what I'm going to have. And I'm going to focus on this awesomely craggy, really cool ground. So I knew what my composition was going to be. I knew I wanted 15 millimeter. I knew what I wanted to do there. And I wanted to go wide as possible because this is such a better lens at 2.8 instead of stopping it down. The Rokinon, just a little hint, the 24 millimeter Rokinon, it has tiny amounts of coma at 1.4, and so I'll always stop it down to 2. As you're focused, you see your focus, and then you take your aperture ring and you turn it down. 1. Wow! You see this ball that you just focused become this tight dot that you focused. It's brilliant. And so I almost always use my Rokinon at 2, but 2 is much better than the 2.8 I get out of the Tamron. So it's worth the sacrifice, if you can call it a sacrifice. Oh, did my camera crash again? Come on. Wow, this is really disappointing. I gotta do something better than the EOS remote. Apparently, that's not gonna be a solution. So I apologize, guys, for that ridiculousness where I'm looking at the camera, talking to the camera, and you guys don't see any of it. So EOS remote, let's get you back to the live view shoot. I don't think it's a timer. I have this thing on a timer where it's just timer free. It's also plugged into a battery, and so it can't be that it's having an issue with, hey, it's timing out. It's not timing out, but it in essence is timing out. So I wonder what the deal is. So let's get that window back up. And this time, Rob, I am going to turn off the focusing reticle. Get that out of the way. I don't know why it has to do that. All right, let's make this nice and big. You can see me. I keep talking to a crowd that can't even see me, so I'm sorry for that. Man, I need to put Rob in my ear where he's like, hey, your camera crashed again, so fix it. Let me turn that off. Go back. How's it going, guys? Okay, I was saying this and this have a difference in 2.8 to 2. If you wanted to see it, here's where the aperture ring is on the manual Rokinon. It doesn't communicate to the camera. Your camera won't know your aperture, so you have to turn it down here manually by twisting it. So, all right, let's get my face out of the way of the images, and hopefully you'll see me now. I got another window up there. Let's get rid of it. Yes. Okay, cool. Back to work. So you set up your camera. You got a 15 millimeter you decided on, your composition you decided on, 2.8 you're going at. So now how do you get your proper settings? How do you make sure that histogram is singing and looking like this in your camera? So you take an exposure. You guess an ISO. Just guess any ISO that you feel comfortable with. Every time you go out, you'll start with your comfortable. Mine, 6400. I always start there on the Canon 6D. I get that ISO just right, or I get that ISO started, take a shot, and I check the histogram. Depending on the light in my terrain, I might find the histogram fights me a little bit. And when it starts fighting me, it's because other light's showing up, and so we're getting higher than midtones, or I'm starting to see sort of 3 peaks, and it's confusing. So I like to go to the extreme at that point. If it's going to fight me, let's see what happens if I go to 12,000 ISO. That's what the histogram looks like, okay. Then I go to 20 or 3200 ISO and go really low and see what that looks like. And then between those two extreme examples, I have a base example of, okay, this is how the histogram is changing based on my ISO. I understand where the light pollution is here and where the lights from the foreground is happening. Or if I have this and I'm lighting my subject, I'm going to have a much different histogram. I'll show you that here in a sec. you're going to have to adjust to that. And so then you start tweaking your ISO up, taking a shot again, taking a shot again, taking a shot again, and now you got your ISO where you want it. Well, what if you haven't changed your decision on your shutter? Well, what's your shutter going to be? Mine, for the anal pixel peeping crowd like myself and Rob Ryan, we are going to shoot at something like 13 seconds. Why? Because, well, my camera can. Rob, probably not. Hey, Rob, let us know what your shutter typically is, because Rob is on a crop sensor, and he's on a Nikon where after 3200, it's nuts and ruined. And so typically he doesn't do that. Oh, Gustavo's going to be in Salem. Oh, man. That place might have clouds, but you're going to have an awesome long eclipse. So here's the situation with shutter. Rob, let us know what you had. So for my shutter, I like to be at 13 seconds because then I don't have any star trailing at all. And then I do have to compensate for that low shutter with the higher ISO, which puts me around 8,000, 12,000, 6,400, depending on the scene. In this case, at 2.8, at 20 seconds and 5,000, I got a good exposure. I got a great exposure histogram. Really happy about that. Let's look at another example before we go on. The trestle. What was this? What was the Milky Way of the trestle? Because here we have a light painting situation. So you can see how we're not actually light painting this. This is from a crowd of people. Oh no, this is us. I could see the change in the flashlight. This is when we're using our exact clicky still and not the low level lighting. And you can see the histogram has an overblown peak on midtones because of all these lit bushes and the lit trestle. That makes a big difference. But I'm seeing a separation from the blacks. There's not as many blacks. As you can see, it's just the background here that has some black. In this area up here, you can see the black there. So it's just not really as much as in others, but I can see that separation, and I know that histogram's okay. Well, what was my setting? 17 seconds, 4,000. So when I look at this again and go, it's peaking but leaning towards the back. My midtone is right here, and it's pretty far from it. So this is an underexposed Milky Way, and I'm kind of limited what I can do with this and how much I can clean the noise. It's just if you have a properly exposed Milky Way, the noise just seems easier to work with. And still talking about locations for eclipse. Cool. Well, I have no idea if you have any questions. So Rob, like I said, hook me up with the questions. Don't let me miss any, at least any that are about this. So let's go out to an area where we light painted. And it's in, if you've seen our most recent Escalante video, this is that area. This is my panorama for the sunrise arch. And so let's go to this one where it has a lot of the core in view, and let's go to the import settings. How'd my histogram look? See what I mean by the histogram goes nuts when you light paint? In this situation, how does having a tracker change this equation? Still targeting the same histogram, just lowering ISO and lengthening shutter time to get there. Yeah, Tyler, your situation is that you can have a much longer shutter without worrying about star trailing. And your exposure too. But what you want to do is get your shutter that you really want to do, take the shot and check the histogram. It might be a minute shutter in your situation. It might be a minute and a half. Kirk, what was your Crater Lake shutter length? 30? No, you said something like 60 or 90 seconds. I can't remember. Let us know. But you get that shutter where you want it to be so that you're getting a lot of information, and then check the histogram. You're going to have a lot more light. You're probably going to see something like this where you just have a ton of light information. You don't have the separation of humps. So what you want to make sure you have is you have a foreground black to the rest separated. They're not all clumped together. Let's use, I'm always wanting to use like a visual aid, and then okay, this is perfect. All right, this guy, if your histogram only looks like this, you've got something wrong. You want separation somewhere. You don't want everything together from blacks to midtones to whites. You don't want everything together. You want to have two of these, or in my histogram up here, you can see how it's spread out. You want that. And so as long as you get that histogram, as you can see, that's what I was going to say. Oh, cool. Thanks. Just got tracker this week and realizing I overexposed everything. What was your histogram like? I wonder. probably all the way on the right or too much in the midtones. And overexposing, as long as you didn't clip and have no data on the Milky Way core, because you're going to have these bright spots right here. Let's zoom in on this one. This bright cluster, you want the separation between all these flecks, sand looking stars, and the closer stars that are to us. You want that to be separate and not just something that looks like this where it's blown out entirely. You pull back on your Milky Way, maybe it looked like something like this, where you just can't see the darks from the whites. So Kevin Desai just joined with a full webinar review later on. Absolutely. As soon as I say, hey guys, we're done, see you next week, and I end the live stream, YouTube is going to take this video, and it's an hour long, so it takes longer than normal, and it processes it. It writes up subtitles for every nonsense word I said, and then it puts it out there. So it'll be available for you to watch the whole thing, absolutely. And like Rob just said, all of them, all webinars are available. So looking at this exposure, look at this histogram. This is where you might be, okay, Aaron told me histogram should look like this. Well, I've got that. Well, why do I have that? Look at my background. Look at my foreground. There is nothing not lit. I had this going. This is my, let's make myself big here. I hate that I think isn't working. This is my low-level lighting light. You can see it's got 96, 97 or something LED lights. These guys are fantastic. Let's blind you. Full blast. This is the setting I run it at. This guy is what I was lighting this scene with Brendan, and you can see how it's made everything from ripe. Oh, I should actually let you see. You can see how it has everything. Let's zoom in, but not all the way in. You can see everything right below our feet. You can see our bags. You can see the bushes here. You can make out the difference between the shadows and the light. And then there's no distant background that is black. If you have mountains or a lake way far in the distance, you're going to see the blacks from that. But in this case, everything is higher, and then the sky is the only thing behind it. So we just don't have anything that's showing up black. And this black up here, it's not true black. And so what were my settings here? Well, let's zoom back out. Oh, I guess you're not going to let me. This right here is 13 seconds at ISO 6400 with this light. Why was I comfortable at 6400 even though I had all this crazy light going on that I need to turn off? I could see that my histogram wasn't going past my midpoint. I wasn't overexposing the widest parts of the Milky Way to a point where I couldn't see it. And the light that was actually the worst on here was our underlighting. Behind the arch, we had another one of these shooting up. If you see the video, you'll see Brendan move it. And it was completely highlighting this and blowing it out at the lowest setting. And so we had to move it back even further, and it's still kind of a bright highlight underneath there. It's not a warm glow, it's a bright spotlight. That's the brightest thing in my image. And so my midtone, still pretty good, not crossing that plane. I have a separation bump from the darker section to the brighter section. Somewhere in between here is the Milky Way core data. And so I felt pretty comfortable. This was an exposure I wanted to keep. And then when you put it all together with all your pano, it turns out pretty awesome. Right now it's getting caught up with the file. You're not seeing it in focus yet. Depends on where you are. Oh, and Rue. Andrew. I'm going to sneeze. Pardon me. And I'm not. I guess it's not going to happen now that I said it. Will you put a link to the light that you use? Absolutely. And Sam, just a heads up, we're going to put you to the link that we've been using. That's our Amazon affiliate link. So if you were to buy this light through us, you'd actually give us like $2 doing it. It doesn't change the price on anything you buy, but it's just a nice thank you. So if you use that link, that'd be awesome. And so Andrew was asking if you can see the Milky Way with your naked eyes. Absolutely. Just depends on where you are, like Kirk was saying. And it's just, oh wait, who said that? Was Sam. Sam Lopez said it. It depends on where you are. You're going to see the Milky Way pretty quickly in a dark sky location. If you see my very first video, we talk about the Bortle scale and light pollution maps at darksightfinder.com. From orange to dark colors, blue, purple, you're going to see the Milky Way with your naked eye. Just depends on what's shining in your eyes at that moment. You can stand in a nice purple section, but if someone's shining a flashlight in your eyes, you're not going to see it. So this light was on. You can see how it's even placed right here. Let's talk a little bit. How much time do I have? Can I add this right here? We have 6 minutes. Okay. Real quick, low-level lighting. You put this light up, it's constant. You can do time lapses, it's fantastic. And this light, unless you look directly at it, you can't even tell it's really on. Yeah, you can see the outcome of the light, but you don't get your eyes ruined for the lights above you. It's brilliant. It's awesome. So this won't disturb people who are there with you, also taking shots. In fact, they'll love it. I was at Natural Bridges National Monument. A woman came running down the trail. She's like, oh my gosh, they're lighting the bridge, the Owachomo Bridge. And she blitzed down there, and we were about to leave. I'm like, hey, you know what? I'm about to leave. Do you want to have some time where you can have our light on? She's like, oh, please, will you? Because she loved how it looked. So this is low-level lighting, and in this case, it's way too close to our subject. We had no choice. Behind that shadow, it just drops. It's a cliff, and so we couldn't put the light any further that way, and that's the direction we wanted to light the subject. So, but it's really fun and awesome, and you can see air glow right here, and even aurora happened. It was bizarre that night. We had a little bit of an aurora because it was so huge up north. We could actually see it in southern Utah. So this exposure, that's a good example of 6400 with light painting. Let me jump to another location. Should we touch that one? No. Let's go over. Hey, I'm here with Kirk at this location. Lots of light pollution, and I even went on a higher ISO. So this is going to be great. Okay. So, Bandon, Oregon. Different situation, different conditions. We have water reflecting the Milky Way. So there's more Milky Way to actually see and show up in your histogram. You have light pollution from the side. Let me show you what's going on over here. We got all the shoreline lights just glowing and ruining all the little mist and particulates in the air at the edge of a beach. It just shows up so much more than it does in a desert with nothing in the air. Or if the wind's going in the desert, it's really bad. Any questions? Just bought an LED light for low-level lighting this week. Looking forward to trying out. Awesome, Susan. You're going to love it. And I'll show you the silo, how I use this in, close to home locations, not just beautiful arches out in the desert. So in Bandon, Oregon, you can see how we're actually able to see these rocks and you get some shadow. Well, that's because of this very light. And once again, the terrain wouldn't let us go any further back, but it was a lot further this time. No, I don't think you see it in any of my panos, but you can see the exposure. Let's look at that Milky Way again and see what we're dealing with, because we got lots of light pollution. We've got the rocks being lit, and I wanted to go high. I'm going to try 12,800 ISO. Why? Because look at my exposure. It still hadn't gone past the mid-tone, but I'm completely peaking. Completely clipping all of that there, and so it's a little bit too much. And how does it affect the image? Well, you can see a lot more noise. You can see a lot more noise in it than you could without. But I mean, how bad did it ruin it? If you guys are worried at all about noise in your Milky Way photography, get the proper exposure of your Milky Way. Bring it home and process it. I didn't do even a stitch of noise reduction on this, and still I'm happy with it. I'm not disappointed in this shot. I love it. I love the Milky Way, how it is between those two rocks, and I'm proud to show it off. Will someone who's a pixel peeper like Rob Ryan and I say, well, that's noisier than maybe other shots, but I love seeing this air glow, and a higher ISO or a longer shutter is going to bring out that air glow, and I wanted more of it showing up. I could saturate this and bring out the colors of that air glow, where you can see the light pollution layer and then the green right here. It's really cool. I love it. Are you in Salt Lake City? I live downtown, and it seems like this is a hotspot for nightscapers. Tyler, you live in Salt Lake? Awesome. I live in Orem, but I work in Salt Lake every week. Oh, thanks, Susan, for the gorgeous shot comment. Noise drives you crazy. Susan, you'll find yourself not going to 12,800. If you have a Canon 60, stick around 6,400. The noise is completely mitigated. And man, yes, Tyler, this place is awesome for nightscapers, because you look at our light pollution map and it's pretty much leave the city and you got a Milky Way. I have a 45-minute drive from here to my best dark sky site with a silo, a train trestle. We've already looked at pictures of the train trestle. So let's jump to the silo. If you guys don't mind, I'm going to keep showing examples. It's been an hour. I don't have to go anywhere if you guys want to watch more. Let me just summarize for those of you who only could give it an hour. You want to make sure that your exposed Milky Way is set up like this with 2 humps at all costs. If you light paint, if there's light pollution, if there's just a moon a little bit up and you decide to take the shot anyway, you're going to have experiences like this where your histogram just looks nuts. It's not separated and all black on one side. You're going to have a big old winged hump, and that's okay. What you have to do at this point is make sure you can see separation, obviously. Try extreme high ISO, extreme low ISO, and see how that histogram changes. Get a feel for it. Okay, this is the shape of the light pollution. When I go high ISO, it goes here, low ISO. Okay, I can recognize what's happening. You see those 2 extremes, decide on a median, and go for it. Make sure that you don't go past the midpoint. Don't go past the midpoint too much because you're going to have tons of noise on your foreground, and your Milky Way is going to have points where when you're looking at these awesome highlight areas, you're going to blow them out, and you don't want to blow them out. Where's my favorite little highlight area? Right here. You want to see the grit of the distant stars with the front more close to us stars visible. You don't want to overexpose to the point that this is just a big white blur, a big white mess. If your image comes out like this in your histogram, you can see what's going to happen. When you come back and you try and bring it down, you're going to lose some data. Yeah, you'll make it darker, but that big white blob is all blobbed together. It doesn't all of a sudden become separate dots. You have to actually expose it as separate dots, and then you can change your contrast up and down and make it look the way you want. But if you turn those dots into this blob, this nondescript blob of white because you've overexposed it, you'll never get that back. You've also want to make sure you don't just have only the very few dots available because you're at the lowest 2000 ISO and you just don't see it. Fix it with longer shutter. Fix it with higher ISO. Get that exposure to have a black bump and go to a mid-tone bump and get that in there first and then work around that. That's a properly exposed Milky Way. I'm surprised an hour went by that fast, but that's the summary. Hope that makes sense. Let's keep showing more examples with you guys who are still here. Looks like I'll need to get on a boat. All right. Hey, Rob, thanks for showing that link for Dark Site Finder. That's awesome. So let's go to Crater Lake. Crater Lake was amazing. And it's a good example because it has that same week of light, air glow, how it's going. It's Oregon air, and it doesn't have any of the light pollution. I mean, you can see it immediately. Look at the difference. You just have real black skies compared to what you had before. Let's see more of the core. Let's do this side. We can see Wizard Island. So this is Crater Lake. Hung out with Kurt Kais over here, kaisphoto.com, and we were out here at Crater Lake enjoying one of the best skies ever. If you remember my first lesson about planning and location scouting, or was that the second? That was the first lesson, and we talked about that cleardarksky.com where it has those blue boxes and it shows darkness and it also shows clouds. Well, there's other settings of transparency and seeing that we talked about, and I didn't go into big detail on those because they're not that important. This night at Crater Lake, it was across the board brilliant. It was blue in all the transparency, seeing hours and darkness and clouds, just perfect settings. And we're high in elevation, so we're above a lot of what's going on, and the heat, the moisture in the air, the light pollution. Oh, it was great. Fantastic. So let's look at my Milky Way exposure. What's happening here? Look at my histogram. That is not my ideal histogram. So why was I happy with this? Well, it didn't go past the mid-tone. I was already at 12,800. I was seriously already up here at ISO 12,800, so I wasn't going to go higher than that. In fact, I could fake it, but my Canon 6D that's up there, I can't take it past 12,800 unless it's the exaggerated fake version, and I don't want to do that. And so what other option did I have to bring this to my mid-tone more? My shutter. It's the only thing else I could change. And I had to decide, do I want to bring that to the mid and just get that perfectly exposed Milky Way, or stick with this and have perfectly tight stars? Now, if I had gone any further, you can see these planets. There's just still a little stretch to them. Is it the stretch of my lens? Yeah, most likely. I'm up at a vertical, so everything is coming across my lens and being stretched. But I also have maybe some movement in the ground, maybe my shot. Let's check the next image right here. It's going to load pretty pinpoint on this shot. I may have had less vibration, less movement, less issues in this shot than I did in the previous shot from panorama, because you can see these are all pinpoints. Look at that. That's great. I mean, the things that are stretching are just so distant. It's not because I'm out of focus or trailing. What you want to look at are those big bright stars that are closest to you and see how they look. Here's Saturn, and that was just a nice circle. It wasn't an oblong shape. So I had my focus right. I didn't stretch it or turn it or change it or bump it. So this is a nice solid shot. And here's my histogram, my foreground and going up. Why is it such a blob and not separate? Well, it's because I've got reflection in the lake and I have snow. The snow is bright, and all of that snow in the image is making this light up. And it's just nothing you can do about it. So that could confuse you on your Milky Way exposure. The snow and the terrain, the reflection in the water, that could change your histogram to different shapes. It won't just always be clear cut and dry, boom, boom, boom. So you're just not going to have that. Depends on your terrain. Let's see if any questions have come up. Oh, thanks, Susan. This place was awesome. I can't wait to finish this weekend the Escalante video so I can start the Oregon video and show these scenes off on our channel. Let's see what else I have after that. I think, oh yeah. Yep, I've got the Escalante one. And this one's a completely different setting, so I love that. Let's do this. So, Escalante, the Grand Staircase Escalante area. In this shot, at completely raw, look at how greenish blue it looks. The air glow was crazy different that night. I processed it out a bit much, but it was so green. It was so much greener than I've been seeing before. It was just one of those nights, and it turned out the next night aurora was happening, so no question why the air glow was a little bit more affected. So you're looking at my Milky Way. I have light painted with this. Those rocks were pretty close. If I had my choice, next time I go out, I would bring that light double the distance. This is it's like car headlight kind of lighting. And so when I processed it, I brought in some contrast and a little bit of clarity more than I would have, just so that I could make the rocks look less like they've got blown out by light. But look at my histogram. It is terrible, but not. Why? Well, I have a hump. I have a second hump here in black, and then it goes a little over the midpoint, but not much. The peak of the bump is not over the midpoint. It's close to the midpoint. And so you'll look at this image and say, why is my histogram looking like that? Giant rock pinnacles are being lit, and so they're most of the light. I have a background up in the front, or a foreground up in the front that's kind of black, nothing really black, but this is the only black I have in the image. I mean, my black sky is just green. Let's look at my stars. Look at, they're all facing just a little bit of a direction. So at 13 seconds, you can see just a little bit of stretch. Is that stretch focus? Is that stretch bumping? I'm thinking it was bumping. I was rushing the shot. I know I was. So I'm thinking it was just a little bit of movement at my tripod, and it just stretched it a little bit. But it doesn't ruin the image. Don't worry about it. My histogram, because the hump doesn't go over the midground, because the hump is, I understand why it's doing that, because of light painting in this situation, and I have a separation with the true blacks, I'm good. I have an exposure, and 6400 did it. I didn't have to do the 12,800 that I was doing over at Crater Lake. I only needed to do 6400. So I kind of got this area in my Canon 6D now. I start at 6400, and I go up as I need. I just adjust and play with it. Any questions? To set the light on the ground. Oh, you know what? Okay, I'm going to walk away from the camera. Just stare at my desk. Oh, I can't. Crud. I can't because the tripod's being used right now for the task cam. So I have my first tripod that I ever purchased that I use. That's my backup tripod for this. I just hook it on here. It's got a shoe for it or a little screw in, and then I can tick it on the tripod and I can adjust it. And I like that tripod a lot because it has the ability to pan back or tilt it back. And if I tilt it back, I can get this light to be more of a fall off instead of a direct light. This situation, it was not fall off. It was definitely directly hitting it. Do I have a good example of fall off on a close subject? Yeah, this one more. About the same distance away, the light is hitting these rocks. But because the fall off is happening, it just looks like moonlight instead of being so bright. So let's look at the raw, like the edited in Photoshop is the most recent, because this is not the pano. So the import. Here's before the stitch. And you can see my histogram is much more like the ideal histogram. I've got a big black. I got a big hump here. They're separate. I have a separation with the Milky Way core. And it's looking like it's stretching just to the midpoint. Perfect. Fantastic. Loved it. How is my focus? My focus is looking okay, but I just still have a little bit of star trailing. And, I was doing 13 seconds long. Is it because I bumped it? Is it just because at this situation I should have done less seconds and have more of a pinpoint? Maybe. I'm going to have to play around with that and do about 10 seconds versus 13 and see if this trailing that we're seeing here, this little bit of an oblong shape, see if it's because of the 13 seconds or if it's virtue of just bumping the tripod, talking while it's going. But again, I can't emphasize enough, don't worry about it. It's not going to ruin your image in the end. You're going to be totally happy with it. So I want to point something out. Do you have any questions? Future webinar covering panorama workflow and foreground would be invaluable. Okay. If you go to my channel and see the video on Milky Way processing, you'll see me do a panorama. And my camera turned off again. What a bogus camera. Just got to stop using it this way. So let's get my camera back. Come on, you stupid EOS app. So the answer will be in that video. That tutorial shows you how I do panorama, but it's going to be kind of quickly mentioned. It's not going to be something like how we could handle it here in a live webinar. So I am more than stoked about the idea of doing that for you. When we finish this live webinar series of these 4 that we talked about with gear next, maybe we should focus on getting a webinar set up just for panorama, and I can do some panorama stitches. I can show you one that didn't go well. I can show you one right here from Crater Lake that no matter how I try, Lightroom treats it terribly. It's horrible. It's depressing. My final image for our podcast cover looks like this, and you can see the bowing in it just because I wanted something. I wanted something to be visible. So what's going to happen? How do I fix this pano? Well, Lightroom's not stitching it intuitively, but it's not over. I can go to PT GUI or other panorama stitching softwares like Photoshop and manually connect it and tell it to not treat these trees as an element of these tree branches and try to fold it up. That's what's happening here. And I didn't get a high enough shot. That's the highest I ever went on the top of the arc. So you can see how I accidentally didn't get enough above headroom of the Milky Way where the craziest distortion of the stitching would happen off of my composition. I wanted all this weirdness to happen above the Milky Way where I just crop it off and I'm good, but I can't crop it off in this situation because it cuts off my Milky Way. So it's kind of a bummer. So I think in that webinar we can talk about failures and successes. That's pretty much the hallmark of Photog Adventures is here, let's share our failures and our successes. So I wanted to talk about the sky and emphasize one point about these settings, and I wanted to point them out. Use warp in Photoshop to fix it. Exactly right. Gustavo is pointing out that I can go in there and then I can warp it manually and pull things in and make it not that stretch. And so It's not working easy in Lightroom, but I have more than enough tools to fix it. And I'm thinking of doing an entire tutorial of when I do that so I can show how I fix it. And maybe that'll be useful for you, man. So these guys, let's look at these guys versus, say, do I have a bad example up here? No. Okay. I am just going to drag this one through my collection and put it next to a poorly exposed or just an underexposed image of the Milky Way. Something from my earlier days, and just not understanding that I should stop worrying about noise and start worrying about exposing the Milky Way properly and work from there. Yeah, maybe this trestle shot's good because they're both good images. It's not a bad image. It's just there's a big difference. There's a huge difference in the sky. In fact, I'm also going to bring that 5000 ISO one in because it is the same area as this trestle. And I want to point out the differences with, apples to apples. So Escalante area, much darker sky site. You're going to see much more stars. You're going to see all of these fun star clusters, and they're just all that black space in other images like this one. All that black space, as soon as it lets me actually control it, all this black space up here, it's not empty. They're stars. And you can see that in this image where you can't see it here. Different sky situation, different light pollution situation, and different settings. 4,000 compared to 6,400. This one is in the same sky area as that other image. So this trestle is just down the street from this dry pond. It's right next to each other. And look at the difference. Was it light pollution only that made this sky dim and lacking in star and texture? No. It wasn't the light pollution. It was a difference of another 1000 ISO. Now, in this situation, 17 seconds and 20 seconds as well. So I had a longer shutter and I had a higher ISO. Well, this information right there, it's showing you my foreground. My foreground, I kept it at 100 ISO so that I wouldn't be noisy here, because all these black areas in the craggly earth was going to be crazy noisy if I had at any higher ISO. So I only did that at 100. But I remember that it was 5000 ISO. I'll just show you for proof. Sky shot, 5000 ISO, 20 seconds. So when you bring up your exposure and you get your properly exposed Milky Way, you're not just helping the core of the Milky Way look awesome. You're helping the entire image, right to left, top to bottom, have more stars. And the more stars in there for people from cities that just don't see the Milky Way and they don't see all those stars, they think of stars as these 25, 100 pinpoints. They don't realize that there's millions up there all the time. They don't remember that. And when they see a sky like that, they're like, whoa, that's a lot of stars. And I was out taking a picture and I could have been like, look at this trestle and check out all these stars. But just that difference in ISO, a few seconds of properly exposed, really brings out the sky. And so it's not just about having that histogram perfect and making that Milky Way awesome. It's about bringing more interest in your image, more of the stars, and just impress people with the texture of the sky. When I did the dry pond Milky Way thumbnail for YouTube, I actually only used this part of the sky just because it's so interesting, even though it doesn't show any of this. Also, it's a very tall and narrow image and hard to do a 1080 wide thumbnail with, but zoomed in like this, it's still really cool. So that's why I want to emphasize a plus of having a properly exposed Milky Way, is you can bring out more of those awesome stars. Aaron, would you go lower ISO always instead of the histogram to properly expose the shot? Because I'm a star trail freak, I'm going to go as low shutter as I possibly can, but bring the ISO up as high as I need to get that exposure. So instead of the histogram to properly expose the shot, would I go by lower ISO? No, I mean, I think that's opposite of what I would say. I'm not sure if I'm misunderstanding you or if you meant it that way, but I would focus on higher ISO by default. If you have a crop sensor, if you have a camera that has 3.5 lens, higher ISO, go higher. Get that histogram to be separate from the blacks to the Milky Way midtones and whites. Get them to show up separate and get them with high ISO. Make that shutter as small as you can to get that sharpness that you want. Get that focus exactly right, and then bring the ISO up. You're going to be more happy with your image in the end if you see clarity and more interest than you will be by, hey, there's some noise in this corner, or there's some noise in this dark spot on the foreground. Nah, no one's going to care. No one ever does. It's only you. So I would actually say lean to a higher ISO and just get that histogram. Any other questions, guys? The upgrade is a Nikon D750. You're going to love that. Always get the histogram to the mid-range. Yep, yeah, exactly, Gustavo. Absolutely. Get it to the mid-range, but try and make sure that you're not bringing everything to the mid-range. Have a separation. If it's a big blob, try high ISO and low ISO just so you can see what happens to the histogram in different examples, and then go to the one you want. And you'll recognize where that black starts and ends to the midtones. You'll recognize that even on a weird starfish-shaped blob, and then you can adjust from there. And that is an awesome lens. Yeah. Okay. Any questions? I'm going to babble for 2 more minutes. Right now it is 12:20. So let's end it here in 2 minutes. If you have any questions, hit me up. Anyone who's wondered about low-level lighting, I told you about the fall off. I told you this, but just know when it clicks on, that's the max setting. I wish I could go even lower. And so the way that I make sure that this is lower on my subject is I get it further and further away. The other lesson is that here's your camera, here's your light. No, that's terrible. You don't want it to light your subject flat. You're going to want to bring it out so that it is, perpendicular to the angle you're shooting at the very least, maybe even a little bit more. So you have a subject, say, here's some really cool pinnacles right here in the terrain. Oh, you can't see that. Here's some really cool pinnacles in the terrain, and you want to light them. You're going to want to get them lit on one side or the other and not the front face, because you want that contrasting shadow. You want that really interesting shadow. Low-level lighting is fantastic. Go to lowlevellighting.org and learn about that from Royce Baer and Wayne Pinkston. Get some gear and help the national parks realize that we're not going to be out there with this big flashlight and waving it around, and all of a sudden the dark sky that's beautiful turns into this like light show, and then it turns off. And then someone else turns on a light show again and it turns off. They hate that. Other people hate that. And so they're getting rid of light painting in all the national parks almost. And so we need low-level lighting to save the ability to light our subject and do astrophotography without interrupting everyone else and the wildlife and making it annoying. So any questions come in while I said that? Hey, Tobias, I'm really jealous that you have your picture on your wall, Tobias. I got to get one of mine on the wall. We have that one, and that's it. So let's see. Brian Miller, hey, man, especially if you have a 4K monitor, it will make you feel terrible about your astrophoto. Yeah, don't let yourself fall for that, because everyone's going to see your stuff either printed where it just smooths out the noise, or they're going to see your stuff on Facebook, which makes noise, or they're going to see it on a smaller screen. Even my iPad Pro, when I show it to people, it hides everything. So the 4K giant monitor, only you see it that way. Don't worry. And any questions that have come up? Man, you guys are having a good conversation. I don't want to end it. How close do you get to the subject with your light? Okay, I kind of went over that, but let me just answer it directly, Donna. When I'm at the silo, in fact, do I have a good silo shot right now that I can show you? Probably not in quick collection. So let's just go to all photographs, library, and let's look at my silo. Silo. So the silo is a very close to me subject. And here's me setting something up. And here's out of focus. So that's a good example of what out of focus looks like. And let's go to a good image. Out of focus, out of focus. Oh yeah, this is that whole night where I accidentally went out of focus. I was so depressed when I came back. Let's use this one. It's not processed yet. It's very bright. You can see I'm at 12,800 ISO. Actually, you can't tell the light painting very well. Let's go to one that you can. Oh, that yellow light. We had a yellow light pollution problem in this area where, look at the nuts yellow light pollution that was happening. It was disgusting. It ruined everything. Oh, so frustrating. Look at how it is behind the silo. But this helps you see. So you can see right here, our cameras are set up right there. This wasn't our shot. We were just getting ready, and then we realized that it was the apocalypse back here with that light pollution. And there's a red light on this train track that was lighting the silo. It was just, everything went terrible. So here's my light on the tripod, shooting here, almost straight on, but I'm over here on the right. What I wanted was a shadow in between these two bumps of the silo and shadow on this side. So you can see how it's roughly 30 yards away from the silo. So it just depends on your subject. If I were to pull up Royce's image, I wonder if I have it easily accessible and we can end on that. It's a good example of light painting from the distance. In fact, oh, I do have it as a template. Yep. Okay. I have our YouTube thumbnail of his presentation. If you haven't seen the Royce Bear presentation, it gives you some very good specifics on light painting, locations, and how it works. Well, this image right here, with my face there, you don't see it as well. So move over here, but you can see how from here to here, you can't see the light. It's actually been cloned. It was somewhere around here in the image, and it was lighting both of these, this pinnacle and this pinnacle. It was lighting both of them with one light, and it's exactly this light. And we're not talking a bigger panel. We're not talking anything more amazing than this. This guy turned up to a proper brightness that lit up both of those. It's just awesome. And look how natural it looks, especially in this shot where the Milky Way is your light source on the left and it's hitting these side of the rocks. I love this image. We are going to have a Photog Adventures listener adventure to these rocks in Hanksville. We're going to do Hanksville, this, and Goblin Valley for a listener adventure next spring. So I'll put it up there. There's going to be a paid workshop for this too, but we're also going to do a free one for listeners over one weekend. And so stay tuned for this. Maybe Rob Bryan can join us. Maybe Kirk, you can come down and be there. But yeah, we went long, but I'm okay with going long. I hope you guys had fun. Any questions that were lagging? Gustavo, Donna, you're welcome, Donna. Any thoughts on the Nikkor 10.5? Rob can help you out with that more. Link to the light, Kevin? Yep, absolutely. I might as well just try and give it to you right now. Let's see if I can find it easily enough. Google. Let me look at our links. Oh yeah, I just barely did it in a podcast. That's true. So let me go to our podcast link. We talked about it again, and so I linked to it. It was in the show notes here. No, it was to Rob Ryan, maybe? Man, no, that was actually the Star Tracker. So it'll be something where you'll wait too long for me, Kevin, to find it right now. So I can't do it on the live video, but I'm going to say goodbye to everybody. Thanks for hanging out. Next Saturday, we'll be here, same time, 11 a.m. The shot will be over there, not at the computer. You're going to see me at our podcast table over there where we edit our record our podcast. We're going to talk about gear. I'm also going to have our gear time specialist, Brendan, hopefully with us. I hope he can make it next Saturday, 11 a.m. And we'll have his gear and mine that we can talk about. Astrophotography gear, the pros and cons. We already have a gear video for our 2016 gear that's going to have a lot of that information if you want to watch it now. But we're going to do a quick discussion there and have the last webinar of this series. Thanks, guys, for joining me. Again, I'm Aaron King with Photog Adventures. Thanks for watching. Thanks for coming. Thanks for everything. And find us on our Facebook channel. If you have any questions, hit me up on the YouTube comments. I'll be there all the time. Thank you, and have a good Saturday. See you guys. I'll hit the stop streaming now. Thanks again, Rob. Thanks for your help, guys. Let's go ahead. Have a good